Hi everybody, I'm Marcia McCarrow.
Hello, I'm Carol Cooper.
And we're here today with Sam Culshaw-Robinson from the Live Well practice, which is a practice based in Nottingham in the East Midlands. And Sam is a hypnotherapist and coach and is rated as one of the top 3 hypnotherapists in the area. Hello, Sam.
Hello, Marcia and Carol. Thanks very much for having me today. My website is the Live Well practice, but I have 2 hats. So I'm also the Work Well practice, because we're not only workers in isolation, so I work in both areas.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Sam, for clarifying that. I want to start off by asking you, Sam, what the difference is between hypnosis and hypnotherapy. And you probably get an awful lot, so I thought that'd be a good place to start.
Yes, some people are confused. So hypnosis is really an altered state. So a bit like when you have that rapid eye movement state of your sleep, when you're dreaming, it's part of the way your brain waves, the frequency is altered. So you become more intuitive, more creative in that state, and you can access your unconscious. So sometimes things just pop into your mind, and your unconscious controls 95% at least of your behavior. So it's so important. You know, we just get into the habits of doing things. We don't question them, they're automatic. So by getting into the state of hypnosis, either self-hypnosis, hypnotizing yourself, or being hypnotized by somebody else. So in that state, you can really make change in a very sort of drastic way, almost, really. And hypnotherapy is using that state in a therapeutic way. So often some of the tools are the same as in different kinds of therapy, but because you're in that state, you're more receptive to beneficial suggestions and other tools that we use, really.
Fantastic.
So, yeah.
That leads me quite nicely on to my next question, really, when you talk about altered states. What are some of the common myths surrounding hypnotherapy? And, you know, what do you want people that are listening to this video to recognise about it?
Okay, I think probably the one that comes to mind the most is stage hypnotists make people do silly things. You know, they make them say silly things, make them act like chickens, make them do, you know, have silly responses. So in a therapeutic setting, you know, we don't do that, much as a psychotherapist wouldn't take the mickey out of you or something. You know, we don't do that. So that's one thing.
That's good.
Yeah. You know, unless you're a dictator, you're not going to hypnotize people to do things against their will. So if you come to see a hypnotherapist, it's very much around, we work around the beneficial things for you. You don't have to tell people any of your deep secrets that you don't want anybody to know. You know, you're still in control of that. Obviously, if you've got a good rapport with the person, then you can if you want to, but you don't have to. Also, if you see hypnotists on stage, often the people are completely sort of zonked out.
That's right.
And the reason for that is that they do a series of tests, and they pick the most suggestible in the audience. So if they give them that idea that that's what's going to happen, then that's what does happen. Generally, people, you know, most people are kind of in the middle of the range. So obviously we're all influenced by advertising and that kind of thing, which is suggestion. But we don't, you know, if we see an advert to buy a Mercedes, we don't have to go out and buy one, even if we can't afford it. Do you know what I mean? Most people anyway. So you're not really in that. It's more of a daydreaming state than a zonked out kind of state, really. So one thing people sometimes say is, oh, intelligent people can't be hypnotized. In fact, that's not true. There is a small amount of people who, in studies, they're found are not hypnotizable. But it's nothing to do with your intelligence, because often very creative, intelligent people respond better.
Yeah.
Because I suppose they have better creative abilities in their brain anyway, I suppose. So another thing, people tend to think of hypnotherapy as some kind of mystical kind of witch doctory thing. I think not so much these days.
Hocus pocus.
But it's not. I mean, it was started by the Egyptians thousands of years ago, and they had sleep temples where the idea really behind it is that everything you need is inside you. So if you relax and just let things happen, a bit like the sort of Chinese Tao idea, if you let things happen, the right things come out almost. So it's, you know, and it's not, it was in modern times, it was sort of brought back in the 50s by an American dentist for the dental profession. But NICE, the National Institute for Clinical Excellence here, approved hypnotherapy for IBS, for irritable bowel syndrome. The reason why they only approve it for that is because it's quite difficult to get clinical research for hypnosis, because big companies aren't really interested in funding that, and people like me, we're just one person, so we can't really get double-blind trials and that kind of thing. So there isn't so much research about it. There is some positive research about it, but not as much as on certain drugs or things like that. So yeah. So another thing I thought of is sometimes people say, oh, hypnosis or hypnotherapy can cure something in one session. Now that is possible, but often you need a sort of session to build a bit of rapport. Then you might need another session to do one exercise. People respond in different ways. You know, we've all had different experiences in our past. You know, we respond to learning in different ways, because it's sort of learning, the ability to change, isn't it? So yeah, so usually it's sort of 4 or 6 sessions, not like when you used to see on American sitcoms where people go to see their therapist for years and years. It's a fast solution-based type of therapy, so but not usually in one session for long-lasting change, although that can happen. So yeah, so there are a few of the myths that I thought of. I don't know if there are any that I've forgotten.
No, that's really great information. Thank you for that, for clarifying that. Hypnotherapy is linked to psychology. Is that right? What is the link?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, hypnotherapy is using hypnosis. So some of the tools are similar, but because you're in the state of hypnosis, they can sort of work in a more efficient way. So psychology is really it's studying the mind and its behavior, which I'm also interested in. But hypnotherapy uses the sort of that altered state, that intense focus and concentration, be kind of more, well, in my mind, this is obviously my opinion, I find it a sort of more efficient way of psychotherapy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Would you say that hypnotherapy is scientific? I know you said earlier, sort of like, you know, that it's hard to do the research, but in your professional opinion?
Well, you know, they have done studies at Harvard and other universities. Obviously, they've shown that 2 areas of the brain, so they've done brain scans of people when they're under hypnosis, and they've shown that there are 2 areas in the brain responsible for processing and controlling what's going on in your body, and those 2 areas show greater activity when you're under hypnosis. So if you're imagining a scenario, it's as if you're actually doing it, even though you're just sitting in the chair. So you can see those areas that are activated in the brain. And also some parts of your brain are disconnected during the hypnosis. So for instance, say if I work with a client who has a fear of flying, we can get them to visualize that scenario and go through it as if they're there, but some of the activities in the brain are slightly different, if that makes sense. So it's really interesting the way they've scanned people's brains and seen, you can see the areas of your brain light up when they're activated.
Yeah.
So for instance, if somebody wanted hypnosis for creating ideas, there are more creative sparks in the brain that are shown when you're under hypnosis than when you're not. So yeah, I find it all fascinating.
Yeah, obviously and clearly. So in going back to my question, in terms of whether it's scientific, would that be short answer yes or long answer?
Well, yes, I find it scientific. I don't, as I say, I don't keep double-blind trials and that kind of thing. I do measure people's outcomes as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so it is, but in the way that you know, people learn in different ways. People respond to this in a different way. So I don't have a set way of doing things. I change what I do in response to the person.
And that's the key, isn't it? That's the important bit. Yeah.
So there's not a set formula that I follow in that kind of scientific way.
Yeah, lovely.
Yeah.
So what sort of areas can be treated then with hypnotherapy? And specifically, what do you treat? Is treat the right word to be using?
Yeah, I like enable, really, I think, because I say everything is that you need is inside you. I've only just met the person, maybe. So it's sort of allowing them to access those parts of themselves. So really, I tend to specialize in anxiety and stress, which is quite topical at the moment.
Yes.
And really the behaviors that result from that. So often it's those sort of self-medicating things, smoking, overeating, alcohol, those sort of unhelpful behaviors, but also that can go into the body, can't it? So it can help with physical pain as well.
Yeah.
You know, often if we're stressed, we find we get stiff shoulders and stiff neck. And if that is a chronic condition over a certain amount of time, then it can turn into a physical chronic condition. So, so I've forgotten what the question was now, really, but
what you can treat.
Yes, so it's so wide ranging, really.
Yeah.
But sometimes if you just say you can help with anything, it doesn't speak to somebody. Then they don't think, oh, that's me. So so I tend to limit it to stress and anxiety, which is a lot of people are affected by that. And then those behaviors, because then people think, oh yes, that's what I need. Sometimes, you know, people will say, well, I'm scared of frogs, can you help me? And yes, I can. So all sorts, really.
Fabulous. I know that you've got an academic background, so what was the catalyst for you coming into the hypnotherapy world?
Oh, right. Well, I think really the hypnotherapy came before the academics, really. Because when I was younger, I came to Nottingham to do a law degree. So I wanted to do business studies, but my dad thought that was a Mickey Mouse thing to do because he was a lawyer. And law wasn't really for me. So I failed my law degree and I went into teach IT and further education. So that was quite a different thing, really. But I worked in the community for a further education college. And what I loved was I taught in primary schools and church halls, that kind of thing. But it was often people who'd been totally alienated by education. So they'd had a horrendous time. They were scared of it. you know, they had no self-confidence. But because it was in a school and we had a tea break and it was a bit more of a social thing, they just loved learning and they've just progressed so fast. And a lot of them went on to do other things. And it was that I loved more than the computers, really. You know, it's just seeing people love learning and just really progress and change. That's what I loved. So, yeah.
Fantastic.
And then I went into hypnotherapy because a member of my family became very anxious. And even then, it wasn't really spoken about much, and I didn't really know where to get help. So I started looking into it, and I found hypnotherapy was an amazing tool to use. I mean, families being families, this particular person didn't really want me to help them, because that's what happens in families, doesn't it? They always want, you know, they take what outside people say.
Yes.
Better, don't they?
Absolutely.
So it didn't actually help. It didn't really help in the end, but it helped me change what I did. So, but then I had a few negative comments because I do work in the workplace, and I had a few negative comments on LinkedIn about hypnotherapy, and it was a bit of a woo-woo thing to do, and that got me thinking. And I thought, well, you know, I am quite a scientific person, so I went on to do an MSc in workplace health. So that was the academic side of things, and you know, obviously now I've got the woo woo and the academic. So people,
I like
you
that.
know, all kind of people can have faith in me now, right? You know, so, and I think as well, yeah. The other thing was that because I failed my law degree, always in the back of my mind was that, oh, you know, I didn't get my degree, so that spurred me on as well. You know, because I felt like I'd not completed that.
Yeah. Fabulous. That's a lovely stroll through your background, really, and why hypnotherapy is really important to you. Thank you for that, Sam.
Hello, Sam. I wanted to ask you the question that we all recognise champions and antagonists in our lives. And recognition of both of these extremes help us to give balance to our journey. We know this. So what significant message did you hear along your journey which motivated you or made you second guess yourself? And lastly, how did you navigate them?
I think my family and friends have always been very supportive in this, because they could see how passionate I was. I haven't really had too much negative, really. As I mentioned, that incident on LinkedIn where somebody was saying, you know, well, what do you know about stress or something? I mean, I could see through it, really, because I could see that this person was very stressed, because he was saying, well, I work 40 hours a week and I'm fine. But obviously he's only fine for a certain, you know, amount of time. Well, not 40 hours. I think he said 60 hours, actually. But we all know that can only last in a temporary way. Otherwise you burn out, don't you? And it was obviously a sort of defensive, reaction from him. So really, I've only had negatives in that kind of defensive way. And because I sort of understand a bit of how the way people work, I could take that step back and I could see that, you know. And I suppose it did spur me on to go and do my MSc.
Oh, that's
great.
So
I was thinking, you know, if people are going to have a negative idea, then I'll make sure they don't have, sort of thing, you know.
Yeah, you push that away and keep being positive all the time. Sam, in business, and probably as a direct consequence to our experiences in business, we gain extraordinary strengths in certain areas. We like to call them a person's business superpower. So what is your business superpower and why?
I think mine is probably that I'm adaptable, which is probably, again, just as well at the moment. So I I work privately, I work one-to-one, I work in groups, I can work online.
Yeah.
So I think it's that adaptability really. I'm hoping I'm hoping that's going to see me through,
I
you know.
think that's great in any person, for any superpower base, you know, if you're adaptable, flexible, it's got to be that way forward really, isn't it?
And
So
it's sort of finding what I don't know, in business, if you find you're pushing uphill all the time, swimming against the tide, then it's not the right thing to be doing. You need to switch to something that flows properly, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Feel comfortable in your own skin doing. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sam, is there a book or an article that you have recently read that has had a significant impact on you and your business? And can you say why?
Well, there were a couple of things that I thought of really. Not really from a business perspective, I wouldn't say. I went to see this woman called Fiona Bowman talk, and she's a champion for people who are experiencing domestic violence. And I went to see her speak at Capital One recently, a few weeks ago, and she wrote a book called Did I Wake You, Pet? And it's all about her journey. You know, she went through a very violent marriage, and she's now come out at the other end. She's a leader in facilities management, and she was just an inspiration to me really. And it just really it made me think again about how you never know what's going on in somebody's life.
That's right.
You don't know what stories people have. I mean, she nearly died several times, and she was in a hospital unit for people with head injuries and all this. And to just see how far she's come, and she's managed to get through that, it was just an inspiration. So belittling, really, I think. So that was one thing. And this morning, I've been listening to a webinar by Dr. Sarah McKay, and she's a neuroscientist, but she makes neuroscience accessible to normal people. And I think she's great because she doesn't oversimplify things. Often people oversimplify things, like she was talking about the fight, flight, and freeze reaction this morning, and she said it's not just one switch. It depends on people's experiences they've had in the past, their genetics, their age, their state of mind, and all these things. So she makes it simple to understand, but not too simple, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So she's great as well.
Yeah. Simplify, but
because that can be dangerous, can't it? You know.
Because I think if things are too simple, sometimes you lose it, and it all just disappears, doesn't it? Absolutely.
Yeah.
If you could go back in time, what piece of advice would you give the 10-year-old you, the 20-year-old you, and the 40-year-old you about living a fruitful life?
Right. Oh gosh. Yeah, the 10-year-old me. I was very lucky because when I was 10, I was very happy. I lived in a village. You know, I just played outside and had a great time. So I think the 10-year-old me, I would just say keep doing what you're doing, really. The 20-year-old me, I think I would say, you know, I ended up going and doing admin and learning how to type and things like that. And my passion wasn't really in that. It's been quite useful, I suppose. But I think if I'd put my energy into what I was really interested in at that time, that, you know, that would have been the best thing to do, instead of just being swept along and just doing any old job to pay the bills, sort of thing. And that happens to a lot of us, I think, doesn't it? And my 40-year-old self, I think it'd be more around my children, really. And I think because children grow up in the blink of an eye, don't they? I think and it's so difficult at the time, but you look back and you think, oh, I wish I'd spent more time, quality time with them. You know, it's not always easy because you're so busy at the time with it all. But anyway,
absolutely.
You know.
We have to live, don't we? We have to do the things that we need to do to provide, you know.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, totally agree. Because life does it, just sweeps you along and then leaves you behind and rushes off in another direction.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
when you're not working, Sam, how do you spend your time?
Well, at the moment, I go out for my daily run, or I do some yoga. You know, physical activities is a lifesaver for me. I know, Marcia, you've been doing lots of that lately.
I've not quite got up the hill yet, but I'm still working on it. So.
But it just makes you feel so much better, doesn't it? It really does. Yeah. I love reading, so that's a great escape for me. And cooking, when I'm not under pressure, I like to do it when nobody else is there telling me what to do. If somebody else is saying, oh, you haven't done that right, not mentioning any names, then it's quite a stressful thing. So, yeah.
Go on, mention a name.
Oh.
Only kidding.
Oh, that's funny. So, Sam, what in your life gives you the most satisfaction?
I think my family, really. You know, spending time with my family. You know, I love my work, really love my work, but I think they're everything to me, really. So, yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much.
So, Sam, how would you define success?
Well, I think going back to my family, it's really having the resources to be able to spend that time with my family. I think not having to work all the hours.
Yeah.
And being able to do that by helping people, because that's what's really important to me, you know. Yeah, so
Do you consider
obviously
yourself, sorry, I was just going to say, Sam, do you consider yourself to be successful by that definition then?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're in a state of flux at the moment, aren't we? So you know, my sort of client base are also in a state of flux.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens. You know, I think it may be, who knows what's going to happen. You know, we may need other ways to supplement our income, but we'll just have to see, won't we?
Absolutely. Yeah, we will.
Yeah.
We will.
Yeah. Sam, obviously, this aside, you know, obviously we're all going through these trials at the moment, but this aside, what does the future hold for Sam Culshaw-Robinson from the Live Well practice? Where do you see yourself at the other side?
Well, I can see myself, maybe, you know, I used to work with more local clients, local businesses, and I'd been put off doing online things in the past, really. Obviously, this has forced our hand into this new online world.
Yeah.
So in the future, you know, that's going to open up a wider market, really. So it's kind of, I've got a appointment with my business coach coming up, and it's sort of how to take advantage of that, really.
Yeah.
You know, instead of thinking postcode, we're thinking, maybe we'll think global now. So
yeah,
absolutely.
hey.
And on that note, how can people get a hold of you if they're interested in finding out more about what you do?
Okay, well, I've got two websites. One is the Live Well practice, as I mentioned, and one is the Work Well practice. For the Live Well and the Work Well, obviously I'm one person, so I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm just Sam Culshaw-Robinson on there. I've got an Instagram for my Live Well practice, which is just at the LW practice. I've got a Twitter, which is also the LW practice, and I've got a Twitter for my workplace my workplace health, which is at the WW practice. So there's all a theme, but yeah. So my workplace stuff. I'm a mindfulness coach as well. I was trained with the NHS, so I do mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, MBCT for the mindfulness nerd. So I'm hoping to broaden that out online as well. So I'm hoping to do an online Zoom group once a week. I'm going to start off with that and see how that goes. So yeah, I'll let you have the link. Perhaps you can hop along and have to meditate with me.
Yeah, brilliant, Sam. Absolutely fantastic, Sam, and on two accounts, really giving all the information. But I've been a recipient of your hypnotherapy a long while ago now. But I just think what you do is phenomenal. It's phenomenal.
Brilliant, thank you.
I want to. We always finish with looking at some of the messages that we can take away when we're talking to people like yourselves. And there's so much stuff and there's so much information that comes out of these interviews, and some of it is repetitive, but you know, that's all good, because the messages from everybody are very similar, which you know reinforces that message in my mind. But there's a couple of things that you've said today that have made me think, and one was when you were talking about Fiona Bowman and her book and her life story in particular. And what I've written down here is where you start doesn't have to be where you end up. And I think that's a really powerful reminder for all of us, that actually where we are today doesn't mean that's where we're going to be at the end of three months' time. And I choose to believe that in 3 months' time, or whenever it is, that there'll be a lot of positivity and options and opportunities to tap into. And so that helps me with my well-being, thinking in that way. Because if I think about the other, where do you go with that? You know, thinking about the you know, the fact that there's going to be nothing available. So that's my first thing. And the other thing is when you talked about your journey, and I took away from that really don't worry about having to stop something because it's not right for you and starting again. That takes courage, that takes strength, and then helps you to be practicing in your bliss, really, where you want to be working. And for me, that's really important, because we sometimes get stuck and think, well, you know, if I stop this, I've done all this work and I've put all this effort in, and I may have put some funding into it, but if it's not right, it's not right. And you talked about if you're pedaling uphill and it's you know, against the tide, and it always feels like that, then you're probably not in the right place for you. And actually stopping and doing something different is a good thing to do. Yeah,
exactly. And you always learn something from that thing that you didn't particularly get on with anyway, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, there's always something to be learned from that, isn't there? So
yeah, thank you. So that's me, Sam. CC.
Pretty, again, you know, a lot of those questions which I won't, or a lot of those statements which I won't make again. But the area of the question of the 10-year-old you, 20-year-old you, and the 40-year-old you, it's a lovely message. Not, you know, 10-year-old, just get on with what you're doing anyway. But 20s into 40s, it's not about beating yourself up about what you did and didn't do in your past. It is about the change, which Marcy's mentioned, of course. And it is, you know, leading into Fiona Bowman, that poor lady, now has this positive outcome. And that's really encouraging. I'm delighted she used the word pet in the title, because it sounds like she's one of my home in the Northeast girls, which is obviously where I'm from too. So it's all, the message all the way through this to me is be positive, never worry about the changes. And if you make the changes, go for it. And as you've just said, you know, you've learned from the things that you did do that weren't right for you as well. So that's what I've taken away today.
Thank you.
Well, Sam, thank you so much for giving up your time to be with us today. I really appreciate the interview. I know we've not spoken or been in contact for a little while, but it's good to connect in this way. And I hope that people will check out your website because, as I was saying earlier before we started doing the video, your website's got a really lovely feel to it, and it is a reflection of who you are actually, and how you deliver and what you do. So I hope people will check that out. Thank you, Sam.
Well, thanks. Well, thank you. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It's been
Good.
In these times particularly, it's so nice to connect with people, isn't it? It really is.
Absolutely.
So thanks for giving me the opportunity as well.
Pleasure. Absolute pleasure.